discussing an emerging issue in contemporary Indian society, and we'll be beginning with privacy. Now, the notion of privacy has evolved significantly over the years, and it is a concept that has been seeing development over several decades, and I would say about 100 years in actuality. And the concept has been defined differently by philosophers and political analysts and thinkers all across the world, whereas some have defined it as an individual value, others have defined it as a collective social good that is good for the functioning of democracies. But we'll get to this transformation in a while. Now, privacy lacks a consensually agreed upon legal definition, whether it be there are domestic or municipal laws that do define privacy, but internationally or looking through supranational organizations, privacy lacks a comprehensive or a consensual legal definition. And in our Indian constitution, though there were discussions to include it within the list of fundamental rights during the Constituent Assembly debates, privacy has not eventually been included specifically as a fundamental right in our constitution. However, the UDHR, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the ICCPR, which is the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, which are both bastions securing the fundamental specific rights or human rights of individuals all around the world, everywhere, they do allude to the right to privacy as an important component of an individual's growth and personality, as well as an important component, or what ought to be an important component in domestic or municipal laws. So Article 12 of the UDHR and Article 17 of the ICCPR, they essentially protect against unlawful or undue interference into an individual's family, home and correspondence and privacy, as well as attacks upon their reputation and honor. So, of course, there has been enough developing jurisprudence to essentially view this as a definition of the scope of what the right to privacy could evolve as. And India ratified the ICCPR in the 1970s and it signed it as well. So, of course, there has been enough conversation within the country, not only because of this, but also because of Ambedkar's passionate defense of the right to privacy during the Constituent Assembly debates, that the right to privacy should emerge as a fundamental right. Now, the right to privacy has always been a contentious issue, but it became even more contentious as human populations settled and their numbers grew larger. So, as their numbers grew larger, there also emerged public spaces where these individuals would conduct social interactions, where they would conduct economic interactions, and where they would essentially conduct the daily affairs of their lives. So as these public spaces grew larger and more entrenched, there also emerged private spaces into which these individuals would not want to tolerate the undue interference of anybody, whether it be public or it be another private individual. So essentially, there is a way of looking at the right to privacy, or as privacy as a concept, as developing alongside human civilization, because obviously as populations become settled, there emerge public spaces, and when there emerges the outside, there also emerges the conception of the inside or of a within, where individuals would want the right to be let alone. So now the right to privacy essentially emerges at two levels. So at the macro level, it essentially entails that the state would be obligated to not interfere into certain particular aspects of an individual's life. At the micro level, it entails that an individual's lives and certain specific aspects of it would not be interfered with another individual. So in most law, of course, especially in India, the conception of the right to privacy and the development of the right to privacy, as well as the development of the interpretation of its constitutional basis, has occurred more on behalf of the first analysis of it. Because in general, fundamental rights secure against infringements by the government, but of course that's not again an absolute statement. So the right to privacy has also become complicated, not only because of this, but also because of the fact that as ideas grew and thoughts evolved, it also became the ideas of collectivity and personhood. They also became entwined with ideas of law, morality, and social value. There are communities that prioritize the collectivity over the person. And then there are, traditions intertwined with it, religious thoughts and doctrines intertwined with it. The idea of what is good or better, what is not good or what is evil has also become intertwined with ideas of privacy. So that has further complicated the issue of privacy from a sociological or anthropological perspective, because if there are communities that value privacy, there are communitarian societies that do not value privacy and that value the collectivity over all else, what happens to the individual's privacy in those societies? There are also assumptions that have viewed India as a primarily collectivist society, where ideas of privacy may be alien. where because the factors or the forces or the ties of the community are so strong, it would be unreasonable to instill thoughts of privacy within traditional Indian society. But I personally believe that this is too clear a binary to draw. There are segments within Indian society that have consistently asked for the right to privacy, and just in general human nature, where there is the presence of a public space, there has to be the presence of a private space. A very good example, perhaps in this instance, would be that of the indigenous tribes or the indigenous peoples in India, where in their essence they are within themselves quite a collectivist society. They have very collectivist norms, they're very tribal based. However, they have consistently sought some kind of iteration of the right to privacy against non-interference into their personal values and their personal their developmental goals from the Indian government. So the right to essentially be left alone from mainstream Indian society. So again, this brings back into the discussion of, is privacy a collective value or is it an individual value? More and more scholars are saying that it is both. It is inherent to the individual, but it is also inherent to a particular collectivity as well. And indeed, we will find in the Indian constitution that there have been allusions to the right of privacy. When we talk about the right of minorities, when we talk about the right of religious freedom, we do at a place to also talk about the right to privacy, or essentially the right to be left alone. Now, this is one side of the story. Now, the conception of privacy has also become more complicated in this age of transnational crime, in this age of transnational terrorism and cyber security threats. So governments essentially, because of the fact that technology has become so intertwined into our lives, governments have begun to essentially conduct mass and even global surveillance to protect against threats to national security, to protect against threats to the peace and security and stability of the nation, against threats to friendly relations with other states. So what has essentially come out of this entire controversy around these discussions is that, does the right to privacy have to be sacrificed at the altar of national security, and have to be sacrificed at the altar of the social contract that we all presumably enter into to ensure that the state protects our interests and the state protects our safety? So do we have to essentially sacrifice, does every individual in every country have to sacrifice their right to be left alone, to be protected by the state, or can it coexist with the needs and the necessities and the imperatives of national security? So this is one question, and there have been consistent iterations where the state has defended its various states across the world have defended their intrusions into individual privacy on the basis that it was meant to protect against undue illegal international interference into domestic affairs. So then, of course, in these cases, there have been where the judiciary has defended the state, has defended the interests of the state, and in other cases where the judiciary has said that the mere iteration or the mere invocation of national security would not render the court silent spectators. So this is one side of the story. The other side of the story, of course, deals with private companies. Now, with the growth and the absolute explosion of mega companies like Apple, Facebook, and now Meta, which has now within itself Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. All of these companies, they utilize, they harvest, and they accumulate personal data. Now, this has again become a very complicated discussion. So, on the one hand, there is the argument of convenience that, of course, if these companies, because these are social media companies, essentially, they are social media platforms, if they are able to utilize and harvest personal data, experiences may be tailored more to the user's advantage. So there, of course, there have been arguments for this, and of course, these arguments have mostly been led by these companies. However, there is a deeper and darker side to the story as well. The point is that there do not as yet exist enough regulational safeguards. There are severe lacunae in these regulatory frameworks that limit and that essentially make these companies responsible or for the kind of data that they are collecting and what use are they essentially making of it. Because essentially, as of right now, the way it stands is that if these companies collect data, they are able to use it in pretty much any way they desire, with very little requirements for transparency and with very little requirements of how it affects the individual about whom the data is being harvested. So, of course, the companies would say this is for the good of the individuals, but then the individuals have asked, the citizen groups have asked, that to be connected or to essentially play a part in an increasingly online world, is the sacrificing of privacy necessary? The other fear that a lot of citizen groups, a lot of individuals have had about these kind of companies is that they have psychographic capabilities. Essentially, they would use this data that they have harvested, personal data that has been harvested, to essentially affect social change, to affect political change, regime change, economic transformations, and where individuals may accept the state's interference and into their privacy for the securing of their security, for the securing of national security, for the securing of the security of their homes and daily lives. They are much more loath to accept the interference of private companies who are extremely eager to exploit their data and to essentially actually bring about perceivable social change, which is supposed to be a characteristic only of personal or human autonomy. So of course, this is how conversations around privacy have become more and more complicated, and they continue to be more and more complicated as we approach a completely increasingly digital age. So on the one hand, there are issues where the individual of course wants to be integrated into society, wants to feel safe, but on the other hand, there are also questions as to how much of my own personal rights would I have to sacrifice to feel these things. So there have been of course developments that have viewed privacy, that have attempted to view privacy not merely as an individual value, but also as a social good. Also as a social good that is inherent and good for the functioning of democracies. Because the point here is that if privacy is protected as an individual value, it would be good for the functioning of a democracy as well, because a democracy only functions if an individual feels free to express their own perspectives, to express their own values, to express their own beliefs in anything that they are seeking to pursue, any project that they're seeking to pursue in their lives. So if the functioning of the democracy is limited or is essentially only limited by how free an individual feels from self-censorship, then of course privacy as a value becomes fundamental to the health of a democracy, and it becomes fundamental to good governance and good policies being passed. Now, in the Indian context, essentially privacy has become important in two regards. The first is to do with the Aadhaar controversy, and the second is to do with the ongoing Pegasus controversies. Now, the Aadhaar Act was passed in 2016, and it was essentially meant to collect biometric data about the individuals who would receive or who would be recipients of the state's welfare programs. But these programs or the Aadhaar scheme became more and more contentious because the government began to mandate that increasingly more personal information such as PAN cards, bank details, mobile numbers, property papers, all of this will be needed to be linked to Aadhaar cards. So there was a slew of writ petitions that were filed in the Supreme Court, and there were of course comments that this would be turning India into an Orwellian state. So the one that we'll be discussing today, or that is the most important when we talk about the right to privacy, is the case Puttaswamy versus Union of India judgment in 2017, and this is also called the privacy verdict. Now, K.S. Puttaswamy is a retired justice. So he essentially filed this petition alleging that the Aadhaar scheme was deeply infringing upon the right to privacy of every Indian individual, and it would allow the government to collect data, personal data of an individual to an unprecedented degree. So the Supreme Court, of course, there was a lot of reference from a 3-member committee to a 9-member committee. There was a lot of discussion regarding this. But essentially what came out of it is that the Supreme Court, it upheld the Aadhaar Act. But the very fact that discussions occurred around the right to privacy, the Supreme Court did not absolutely move away from the right to privacy and merely say that, that this is not a fundamental right as it had happened in the Khadak Singh judgment in the 1950s. It became more and more obvious that privacy has now become fully ingrained into judicial consciousness, into jurisprudence, as so to speak. So therefore, the Puttaswamy judgment came to be known as the privacy verdict because the Supreme Court for the first time confirms that the right to privacy is an ingrained fundamental right as interpreted within the generous interpretation of Article 21. So therefore, the right to privacy is entitled to the protection that is afforded to any other right that is enshrined in Part 3 of the Constitution, which essentially entails protection under Article 14, which is the right to equality, protection under Article 19, which is the right to freedom, and protection under Article 21, which is the right to life. So the Puttaswamy judgment essentially also entailed that the court said that if there is any law that is made that infringes upon the right to privacy, it has to satisfy three conditions, as any law that faces fundamental rights review has to. The first is that it has to be based on an existing law. The second is that it has to be based on a legitimate state objective. And the third is that it needs to be based on the principle of proportionality, which essentially means that there has to be a rational nexus between the object that is sought to be achieved by the infringement and the means that are being taken to do so. So now the privacy judgment has also become extremely important, and it also became very important when it came to the progressive judgment that occurred after the decriminalization of homosexuality or the removal of IPC section 377 in 2018, where the Supreme Court held that because the right to privacy has now become so integral to our fundamental rights, the criminalization of consensual relations between two individuals, whether they be same sex or different sex, was an infringement upon the right to privacy. Discrimination on this basis was an infringement upon the right to equality, and essentially forcing individuals to hide this part of something that is so essential to their self-identity is discriminative or is infringing upon the right to life. So this is on one hand. Now we will be essentially talking about the Pegasus controversies that have emerged. Now the Pegasus essentially is a software that has been manufactured by the NSO group in Israel, and it is sold to governments all around the world. It is a spyware which allows the continuance of mass surveillance. So how Pegasus works is that it used to work through spear phishing, where threatening emails or text messages used to be sent into phones, and then once you would click on it, Pegasus software would completely infect your device. Now essentially what Pegasus has, and this is essentially the report that came through in WhatsApp in 2016. But what has now, how Pegasus has evolved now is that it has evolved into zero contact and zero delay attacks, which essentially means that Pegasus may exploit unknown vulnerabilities in all personal devices, specifically phones, having or requiring zero contact with the owner of the device. So WhatsApp, for example, revealed that if a phone that is infected with the Pegasus software sends a WhatsApp call to the another phone, even if the recipient doesn't receive the call, that phone becomes infected with Pegasus. And once Pegasus enters the phone, it will be able to essentially access all of our private data, all of our personal data, including alarms, phone call histories, emails, texts. It may also access our camera and microphone and essentially turn the phone into a spying device in itself. So after revelations had essentially came out, and though they were unproved as of yet, by the New York Times, that the Indian government had essentially bought the Pegasus software from Israel in 2017 after Modi's visit to then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There also was launched the Pegasus Project, which was a collaborative investigative journalism initiative taken by 17 major media houses, including The Wire, including Indian Express, and a lot of other media houses. And this investigation basically found that the phones of journalists, opposition politicians, Supreme Court judges, lawyers, human rights activists, and a lot of other individuals had been, almost 200 other individuals had been noticeably tracked by Pegasus. So of course this led to a slew of writ petitions against, obviously in the Supreme Court, and the government, though it did not deny that it has never categorically denied that it bought Pegasus, it said that these controversies were being used to malign India, or being used to essentially ruin India's image in the eyes of the world. So they termed it an international conspiracy. So after all of these petitions were submitted into the Supreme Court, and because the government of India did not respond in a satisfactory way, as the Supreme Court observed, what the Supreme Court did is that they constituted a technical committee with 3 experts under Justice Ravindran, which is called the Ravindran Committee, to essentially look into this. So the Ravindran Committee is still collecting reports. There have obviously been reports of individuals who are hesitant to submit their phones because of their fears about personal data breaches. However, the committee was scheduled to essentially submit its interim report and meet in court on February 25th. And essentially what will come out of that essentially still remains to be seen. So the point of this entire discussion was to essentially prove that the development of the right to privacy as an integral human right, as an integral fundamental right, has been very important, not only because not only for the personal autonomy and dignity of individual citizens in India, but also because it is good for the Indian democracy, because it is good for the Indian state. So that has been a welcome development. However, these recent controversies like the Aadhaar controversy or the Pegasus controversy, it essentially has caused a lot of concerns, and it remains to be seen whether this right has only been recognized in letter, or would it also be recognized in spirit.